Celebrate the first anniversary of the Chiron 5 Rebellion with TurboWorks Episode 7.
For another one. Not in my water or anywhere. You got that?
Suddenly we find the TurboGrafx 16 drowning in goodness. And it's all Compile's fault, with their amazing shooter based on one of the all-time classic Japanese sci-fi flicks. We've seen a lot of games based on American films and Japanese anime here on VideoWorks, but games based on live-action Japanese productions have been pretty few and far between. Today, NEC dares to break new ground in America with a game built around the 1989 live-action mech adventure Gunhed. Gunhed had not reached the US by this point. It debuted at the Japanese box office in July of 1989, and Japan to US film localization definitely did not happen that quickly back in the 1980s. The point is that we got blazing lasers, not Gunhed, because NEC had zero desire to pay property licensing fees for the title of a film that wouldn't reach the US for ages. See also Keith Courage. The result may not actually be a classic, despite my earlier tongue-in-cheek remark, but it does have a sort of comforting late 80s Aliens or Terminator wannabe quality to it, like Jean-Claude Van Damme's Cyborg or its ilk. At the same time, it features a lot of elements that resonate with contemporary anime. The eponymous Gunhed mech has an awful lot in common with the Fuchikoma mechs in Ghost in the Shell, which incidentally debuted as a manga 2 months before Gunhed hit theaters. I'd say that this film's overall premise of mech-powered adventurers infiltrating an offshore facility to stop a megalomaniacal supercomputer was taken straight from the pages of Patlabor the movie, but that film arrived in theaters literally 1 week before Gunhed. Oh, and the two kids that the main characters meet inside of the offshore facility, named 7 and 11, share a link to the computer that might give you flashbacks to the first episode of Bubblegum Crisis. What I'm saying is that Gunhed is very much a product of its era, and in my opinion, that rules.
Where is Gunhed?
So that's Gunhed, the film that Blazing Lasers is based on. Just kidding, I actually just spent half of this episode talking about a movie that has almost no bearing whatsoever on the game. Blazing Lasers shipped for PC Engine as Gunhed the same week that the movie hit theaters, but beside the name, title screen, and a game commercial featuring Samizdat versions of the actors, I couldn't tell you why they were tied together. Nothing about the game resembles the film, including the player's ship sprite. This appears to be a case where Compile had a shooter in the works and the publisher came along and said, "Can we make this a tie-in to an upcoming movie featuring a mech?" And Compile shrugged and said, "Okay," despite everything. Gunhed the film takes place entirely within the cramped confines of an offshore computer facility, and the closest thing it offers to a video game-like shooting tie-in is a brief sequence in which the Gunhed unit zips down a corridor, guns blazing. It doesn't even have lasers to blaze, just machine guns. On the other hand, Gunhed, or Blazing Lasers, the game, features lots of lasers. It also takes place across a wide array of environments ranging from deserts to the depths of space. There's one boss that resembles a tracked ground vehicle, similar to Chiron 5's combat body, and a few bosses have red eye-like elements that resemble Chiron 5's. But that's it, you can't even pretend that this depicts the war of 2025, since the conflict with Chiron 5 took place entirely on Earth. So this makes for a terrible adaptation. Good thing that it's a completely incredible shooter in its own right. I mean, it's just your typical compile-developed top-down shooter, but it's a typical compile-developed top-down shooter on TurboGrafx 16, and that, as they say, is a game changer. Compile, of course, has been with us from the beginning. Look back at the chronological starting point of the VideoWorks series, July 1983's console launches in Japan, and Compile developed several early SG-1000 titles for Sega. Since then, they've delivered some of the best games we've come across on multiple platforms, be it hybrid RPG shooters like The Guardian Legend and Golvelius, or works in other genres, like their best-in-class Master System adaptation of Ghostbusters. And of course, all of those pure shooters. You had Golkov, which somehow implemented high-speed action and parallax scrolling on SG-1000 of all damn things. You had Zanuck, which incorporated dynamic enemy patterns and super fast action on NES. And you had Power Strike, which harnessed the Master System's additional visual horsepower to present an even more impressive game. Compile shooters have a few elements in common. First, they feature more stuff flying around on screen than the host hardware should really be able to handle. Secondly, they always feature a progressive power-up system based around numeric icons that represent different cool weapons. And finally, while pushing the limits of available technology, they never sacrifice playability, variety, or the sheer joy of manic combat. Now imagine Compile on a console that doesn't have the NES or Master System's limitations. That's Blazing Lasers, a Compile shooter with more technical headroom for its guns. More gun headroom, as it were. Now, we will eventually see a few Compile shooters on Genesis and Super NES, and those will be amazing. But TurboGrafx 16 and Turbo CD is really where Compile set up camp for its 16-bit console forays until the Puyo series hit big and the studio largely abandoned shooting games in one of the greatest tragedies known to gaming. Here at the end of 1989, however, Blazing Lasers is a massive step forward for the shooting genre. It's about as near perfect as a traditional vertical shooter can be. According to Famidaily producer R&D Stranger, Blazing Lasers is one of the greatest games ever made. According to OneUp.com editor Jeremy Parish, it's a masterpiece drowning in goodness. The experts have spoken, folks. Blazing Lasers is good. Maybe the high point of TurboGrafx's initial lineup. And that's saying something. Did you see those ports of Fantasy Zone and Galaga 88? But Blazing Lasers is a wholly original game, not an adaptation based on an arcade title, and despite its Japanese title, not based on a movie. And it single-handedly showcases just what you can expect from this little console in the future. As I mentioned last episode, Hudson designed the TurboGrafx 16 concept in part to support their own shooters, which had become a cornerstone of their business thanks to Star Soldier and the touring caravan competitive events that traveled Japan. So it makes sense that other great developers would exploit that setup to make their own great shooters. In fact, there was even a special competition version of Gunhed that allowed players to gun for a top score in 3 or 5 minute events. It's all very Star Soldier-like, and in fact, future Star Soldier sequels would pattern themselves more in the shape of Blazing Lasers than they would adhere rigidly to the design of the original Star Force or Star Soldier. For a casual tourist through video game history, I suppose it could be difficult to tell all of the TurboGrafx 16 and PC Engine's shooters apart when looking back in hindsight. A lot of them do tend to blend together with similar aesthetics and combat options and gameplay. Unless you really dig into the games, things like Soldier Blade and Blazing Lasers and Gate of Thunder have you doing lots of the same thing in largely identical settings. They're all great, but how many vertical shooters do you need where a little ship flies around unleashing screen-filling attacks while dodging enough tiny little projectiles to power a real-world war for a few weeks? The historic flattening effect of a casual console library ROM survey does a disservice to Blazing Lasers. It wasn't just lasers being blazed here, it was also trails. Explored in light of the other vertical shooters that existed in the console space at this point, especially in the US, Blazing Lasers feels like a genuine next-generation leap for the format. The only contemporary competition it faced was Truxton for Genesis, and let's be honest, technically impressive as that game was, Truxton was simply not as well designed as Compile's game. Also, it was an arcade port, not an original work. Blazing Lasers takes place across 8 stages of extreme Compile-like material. You have 3 lives and 4 credits with which to reach the end, and I can assure you that you won't get there without determination and lots of practice. The game does a fantastic job of easing you into the world, though. The first 2 or 3 stages are almost offensively easy. When even I can sail through a shooter to the midpoint of the 3rd level without losing a single life, you might start to suspect that they balanced Blazing Lasers to be a little too friendly. But no, it's just friendly enough. The back half of the game does not go easy on you, although it is still relatively friendly. You'll come across small pockets of stages that exist entirely to give you a chance to boost your firepower and durability, right before hitting you square in the face with combat scenarios that demand exceptional control and reflexes. But even in those difficult moments, the game disperses power-ups generously. Generous is a great way to describe Blazing Lasers in general. It presents a stiff, but not impossible challenge to players, and at the same time it offers players a remarkable degree of flexibility for how they tackle those challenges. At first glance, Blazing Lasers might seem to be less flexible than other compile shooters. In Xanic and Power Strike, you could collect icons for 8 different weapon types, and don't even ask about how many different gun types there were in the Guardian Legend. Here, you're limited to only 4 icons. Counterintuitively, this might actually be the best thing about the combat setup. By paring the gun options down to just 4 types, Compile has made each weapon more distinct and meaningful from the others. The designers could also pour more love into the different laser types, giving them unique features and nearly half a dozen different incremental upgrade options apiece. There's some interesting nuance to the power-up system, too. In addition to the Roman numeral icons that represent the guns, you can also collect a few icons with letters as a sort of supplemental combat scheme. The add-ons and power-ups operate with rules I almost, but don't quite fully understand. The 4 add-ons, multiple, homing missile, shield, and full force, each offer valuable support skills. But they also appear to be mutually exclusive in many cases, with one overriding the other. If you collect the shield icon, you have a force shield that makes you practically invincible. But if you snag the full force icon, the shield vanishes, and your primary weapon instantly powers up to its maximum level. Something you can normally only achieve by gathering up multiple instances of the same icon. This prevents you from becoming too tricked out. If you had a multiple option, invincible shields, 8-way homing missiles, and max standard gun power, you would literally be unstoppable. So you have to pick and choose which secondary effect works best for you, and you also need to be mindful, in the heat of combat, not to pick up an icon that would disrupt your combat flow at the worst possible moment. Like I said, Blazing Lasers is generous with its drops, sometimes too much so. However, there do appear to be some circumstances in which you can equip yourself with more than one special effect, meaning that you can have an option-style multiple and shields or missiles. Maybe this has to do with collecting multiple instances of the same support icon, or maybe all the purple discs that enemies disgorge, which power up your standard gun. I'm sure I could look it up, but like Gallica 90, part of what makes Blazing Lasers so interesting is the way that it features so many hidden rules and systems, allowing you to figure out the mechanics while also mastering the general patterns and tactics of combat. And really, for 90% of the game, there's no wrong way to play, no mandatory weapon setup. The guns in Blazing Lasers are powerful, versatile, and lend themselves to different playstyles. Some can be more difficult to use properly at certain power levels, as their patterns and behaviors change based on their upgrade tier, but a decent player can make the best of any weapon setup. The one exception that I've found was Stage 7, a technical marvel that all but demands you equip your fighter with shields and just tank the entire level, since nearly all of the hazards there, which utterly fill the screen, can be absorbed by your shield. Which incidentally doesn't deplete or vanish after soaking up an attack or two the way it would in something like Gradius. That stage, incidentally, feels like a showcase for the TurboGrafx 16. It takes place in a field of colored spherical bubbles that bears a remarkable similarity to the bubble stage in Gradius 3, which hit Japanese arcades several months after Gunhed's debut. Now, the bubbles here don't warp or deform as you shoot them, they demonstrate a variety of distinct behaviors, ranging from timed pulsation, to shattering into smaller bubbles, to streaming out from dispensers by the dozen. And unlike with the Super NES version of Gradius 3, the TurboGrafx 16 never so much as shudders while bombarding you with a seemingly endless array of blobs. Truly a technical flex by both Compile's programmers and the console's GPU. Likewise, the weapons you collect have a few truly incredible iterations. Weapon 1, for example, works like a really powerful forward blaster through most iterations. Deadly, but boring. But its final upgrade has a shrapnel effect that causes the beam to explode on impact and shoot fragments of destruction all around the screen, clearing out clusters of foes almost as effectively as the expendable bombs you earn along the way. Weapon 2 fires a spread of wide beams, sometimes in fixed patterns, and sometimes toward the direction you steer. Weapon 3 unleashes chain lightning that expands to an increasing number of forks right up until you reach the max upgrade, when it turns into a single beam that snakes around the screen, making right turns in order to home in on targets, nearly all of which it can obliterate in a single shot. And every level doesn't simply offer a different visual skin, each stage has its own unique set of obstacles and challenges. Blazing Lasers hits you with something new at every step of the adventure, and the challenges within a stage iterate and build on one another, so that each level has its own difficulty curve that resembles the game's overall curve. And all of this with no slowdown to speak of, and surprisingly little flicker. And no real connection to the movie Gunhed either. But that's okay, I can't say that anyone missed any of those things. The experts were correct. Blazing Lasers is a masterpiece. Maybe not the most challenging shooter of all time, but one that, like Life Force on NES, feels challenging in all the right ways while giving players enough options and enough variety to encourage them to continue playing, even if they're not normally into the genre. The weapon system even incorporated auto-fire by default, so that you don't have to toggle between standard and rapid fire on your control pad. Or better yet, on your turbo stick. This is a game that demands arcade precision despite being a console original. Man, Blazing Lasers is a great reminder that video games are just so cool sometimes. Next time on TurboWorks, more shooters I hardly even knowers.